So our next presenter, Nicholas Bullen. Where is Nick? All right, Squire. I'm gonna. Do you want to just start off now? This is your sound.
Okay, great. Hi. I'll introduce myself. My name's Nicholas Bullen. I suppose I'm an artist and a composer, musician. As an artist, I work in a range of different media, mainly around text, sound installations, and to some extent film. And as a sort of composer, musician, I again work in a range of different genres, and my main focus is electronic acousmatic music, using field recordings of my own house. That's the general background to me, but the reason I'm here, the reason Mark asked me is he wanted me to come and talk about the development of a particular approach to the voice, and in this case it's the voice that was used in a musical genre called Grindcore. I was one of the founder members of a group called Napalm Death in the early 1980s, and as such I'm a key participant really in this creation of Grindcore, because really it didn't exist at all before we started to do it, and this form of vocalising in this genre didn't really exist in this way. So this talk's intended to sort of explore the initial beginnings of that voice, its DNA, to see what it consisted of, how it developed and why it developed. And the context really for this is not so much about theory, it's more about a personal approach to look at practice really, my own interest in different types of voice mutation. Further context would be really the form it took, the conditions that the music itself imposed upon the voice and how they interrelate. And then to some extent the political milieu which influenced this approach to the voice. So that's kind of the general background of what I'm going to talk about. Firstly, I suppose we need to really define what Grindcore is for those people who don't know. And why should you know, because it is to some extent quite obscure. I suppose it's essentially Grindcore is a musical style. It developed in the mid-1980s, and it's really a combination and intermingling of certain elements from punk music and from heavy metal music. It generally utilises a traditional sort of musical band structure of guitars, drums and the voice. And I suppose it could be simply described for people who don't know as containing a number of key constituent elements, and they would be minimalist song structures and pared down very short songs, very fast tempos in terms of the speed of the playing, including what's called the blast beat, which is a drum beat that consists of rapidly alternating strikes on the snare and bass drums at tempos of over 180 BPM, so it's moving into quite a fast rhythmic tempo. Use of distortion on the guitars, including retuning of the instruments so that the instruments are not played at the traditional Western concert pitch for instruments. They're retuned to lower pitches to make them have a deeper, more distorted tone and colour. And then the key thing, I suppose, is the voice in Grindcore is a low-pitched, guttural, deep growling voice. It's known by a lot of different names, including the death grunt and what Cookie Monster vocals, after the Cookie Monster from Sesame Street. And really in that voice, that low-pitched voice, the coherence of the lyrical content that's coming through with the voice is overshadowed to some extent by the form that the voice itself takes. I think that's a brief description of some key elements. And I think it would be a good idea to play some of it to get a sense of what it is, put this in context. So we'll start off with a couple of quick examples of the group I was in, Napalm Death. And I suppose this is the first time this voice was used in this genre. So, oh, whoops. Okay, so there are two examples. Stop. How will I stop it, Rock? I'm terrible with iTunes. Yeah, you'll have to turn it off. I'm terrible with iTunes, so. Yeah. So, thanks. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thanks. This modern technology, it's amazing. So, we heard those examples, I suppose, very, very short, that demonstrate very well what it is. And we're thinking this is primarily about, it is about the voice rather than that form itself. The key focus in that kind of composition, this approach, is about notions of extremity, extremative expression, which is inevitable really because it did develop from the more excessive reaches of hardcore punk music and the more extreme end of heavy metal music. This move towards extremity includes formal considerations like altering the traditional form of song structure. Rather than a narrative to be delivered, the song structures become more of an exploration of sound vibration. The traditional sort of structures of those songs are taken apart. The songs become more like laminar streams of sound that just move forwards, almost like an express train rushing forwards to a black hole, to oblivion. And as a result, in this music, the voice begins to become almost unrecognisable. It moves beyond the traditional status of the voice as a site of communication and meaning, and then it becomes more of an object that seems to want to erase itself, its own meaning. Its mode of communication that it seeks, I think, is precisely through this loss of expressive capability. It simultaneously alienates itself for expression and expresses alienation. And it becomes an expression of language which is against language at the same time. The garbling of the larynx produces an aural blast. It takes away that traditional overt sense of meaning and reduces it down towards pure sound, pure utterance. So I think before asking why it developed, it would be useful to ask how, to place it in context. And that context, because I use the voice, is my context. As a young person, I've never had any formal training at all in music, and I had no background in music. My family were not really a musical family. But I was drawn straight away to creativity in general, and I think I initially chose to use the voice simply because it was close to hand, it was immediate, it was available to me as a young person. I could begin to work with it immediately, so I didn't have to wait, I didn't have to sort of pass through other areas to do it, and it was completely free to use. But underneath that, I instinctively knew that really the voice possesses a power, a weight in our culture. There's a very much a primacy to it. It's immediately recognisable to other human beings, and as a result, between us, it creates meanings and it triggers emotions. So as I started to become interested in the voice, it led me towards different manifestations of that voice. And I was most keenly drawn to manifestations of the voice where the voice began to be altered, to change, to become strange or almost unknowable. And as a result, I could sense a power inside that voice. And as a young child, I've managed to find different manifestations of this voice in a lot of different areas. Initially, I found it in what sort of novelty records, comedy records, in 1950s rock and roll records, and in children's records where there might be a story narrated to a young person, maybe to send you to sleep or keep you busy. And some of them used a technique rather like the vocoder that Mark talked about called Sonovox, that made the voice sound slightly alien, slightly distant. It gave it extra layers. I also found it in fantasy television. In the 1970s in England, there was an interesting period where a lot of unusual television was made. People were allowed to make it. And so you obviously had the more mainstream things like Doctor Who, where there were a lot of voice changes. If you know that television series, they have various villains throughout, and they often have changed voices. And that also happened in other English sort of science fiction and fantasy television series. And it happened in children's TV in general, where there was a lot of use of musique concrète and altered voices. And for me as well, being interested in those areas went into the cinema as well, so that I really liked, obviously, as a young child, science fiction films, robots particularly, and that led me on to people like Goddard. So in his film Alphaville, there's a computer called Alpha 60, and its voice is his own voice, but pitched at a lower depth. So I think, to kind of illustrate that sort of initial area of influence, I'll play a short sound excerpt that compiles some of them together.
Play the sweetest music of the side of Mars, a winner.
I have decided that it is possible for the two species to live together on this planet.
Il arrive que la réalité soit trop complexe pour la transmission orale. La légende la recrée sous une forme qui lui permet de couvrir le monde.
So, some examples there of things that influenced me. The last excerpt there is a record by an English post-punk group called Bauhaus. And that record is a 12-inch that plays at 45 RPM. But one thing I did as a child is as I said, we didn't really have a musical household. The record player we had to play records was from the very beginning of the 1960s. And it was a portable record player with a speaker in the front. What it did do is it allowed you to play records at different speeds. Traditionally, a single is 45 RPM and an album is 33. But this one also allowed you to play at 16 RPM, which is slow. And that 12-inch, what I would do is it was a 45 RPM 12-inch, and I would play it at 16, so it really slowed it down. I had to kind of, that was a bit of a cheat really, it would actually be a lot slower than that, and all of the sounds start to stretch. And that was a big influence on me, was playing these records at the wrong speed, making them slower and slower, and responding to the sounds within them and the feelings that they evoked in me. So, as I say, I got into music, you know, at a relatively young age, I suppose. I was drawn to punk music when I was 10 years old, in 1978, and that's when I started to buy records with my money and not buy comics and things like that. And I was kind of generally drawn naturally towards boundary sounds, the edges, the territories, the periphery of the arts, and particularly to drawing together elements that I thought had similarities in tone and approach. And this inevitably had an influence on me when I started to work with the voice and to write and compose music myself. And I think that the grindcore voice in that example of Napalm Death earlier developed as a direct result of various of these influencing factors. I think the key things were, it was a development of a form of expression which I felt was very personal to me, and for me was explicitly cited inside myself, within my body. And it also developed as addressing elements of form, such as tempo and duration. For example, the meter of the written lyric, interacting with these speeded up tempos of the pieces. There was also a degree of imitation and parody of existing stylistic elements, responding to other singers, responding to those kinds of sounds from television and so on. And I think ultimately the key thing with this as well, there's a residual sort of influence of the aspirations of 20th century modernism in it, in terms of there is a sort of a social and political import to it, and I will look at all of these as we go along. I think in the 1970s there was a particular interest in the body in terms of political theory, and also artistic practice with the body as a site for art or material for art. I think if you look back at the 70s, you see the increase of interest in people like Georges Bataille and Artaud, and also the plethora of performance body-related work, and I think it comes through. And in the 1970s, post-punk that developed through punk music seemed to really strongly respond to this notion of the body, and often used the voice as an object that emanated out of the body, out of the physical, but was transformed in the process of doing that, and as a result became much more a sense of material rather than traditionally carrying meaning. And I think that personalised it in the process. I'm thinking of industrial groups who were, I suppose, a subset of post-punk music, used very abrasive sounds, and they'd often use things like pieces of metal as percussive instruments, but would often, with the voice, use analogue effects, electronic effects, to radically alter the voice, to distort it. Groups like Throbbing Gristle and Cabaret Voltaire and Whitehouse would often do this. And there was also a sort of a trend towards feral gesticulations and glossolalia. I'm thinking again, as Mark was saying, Demand de Glace, and then through into a group like Swans from New York who use a deep voice. and also very much a use of the voice as material that could be dismembered and separated. I think William Burroughs' cut-up experiments with text, splicing text together, very much had an influence on post-punk. And I was listening to this music sort of between the ages of 11 and 15, and it drew me in very much. And so I think that looking at how I use the voice as material, it was a really important period. So what I'll do is I'll play another excerpt to demonstrate some of this usage.
When you say things that aren't nice, you hear things back that aren't nice.
Long wind herring him down and shook him. Spoonful in the ear like a salt and crab head. The bell all the night burning. The big gift of her heart was locked into iron riddles. It's past wooded past stone, turned black stone.
So yeah, so different approaches to the voice, very inspiring for me, certainly, and very much this interplay between the form of the voice and its content. Also developed with the more extreme ends of punk music, and within that there was an interest in, again, these ideas of notions of extremity, of extremes. And there were isolated examples of development of a voice that was lower, deeper, more focused on the bass, more guttural coming through the body. It very much emphasised the expression of the voice through the body on the diaphragm and the stomach, rather than say the voice-based works of, you know, Dada, futurists, even concrete poets. There's often a focus on hard sounds, the percussive, whereas this voice is much more laminar, more extended. I think of it as a sort of almost like an animal expulsion, a growl comes out of the body. I think the physicality of that voice is a very conscious element. Its tonal qualities seem to be abraded by the act of creating it, by its expulsion out of the body. I think it then becomes very much a sort of an abstracted expression of the materiality of the body itself. So as I was working with that voice in the group Napalm Death, I began to think of these ideas, and also I was influenced by the other formal aspects. We retuned our instruments and down-tuned them so they were lower than concert pitch. to give them more distorted, deep resonance. And as a result, my voice started to drop in pitch to act within them. And as it did, it became a deeper, sort of a more guttural sound. I think we could have another sound excerpt here to a little bit more, perhaps examples of grindcore to hear that voice in operation.
Being able to earn and pray every year and shelter your back and serve your ass, trying to contain my excitement as an escape driven trance. Strong, confident, professional exhalation, working blind, fascinate, specialist motivation, and smashing pressure in hell. Wherever it takes my heart to, decide what my passions really are.
Times there for grindcore fans. I think just this notion of extremity in the body itself, I think it's influenced by other factors. I was talking about formal elements as we go along, and I think just as the physical presence of a sound wave affects the body, I think expression of the voice can be affected by the sound waves around it, the surrounding musical activity in this case in which it operates. Grindcore very much had an urge towards a heightened velocity, the kinetic energy of that increasing of tempo started to compact its temporal qualities. Songs became shorter and the internal structures of those songs became compressed, and I think this led to a further mutation of the voice. As the duration is reduced, the voice has to contract to accommodate itself within that reduced space. And it results in the delivery of the lyrical content, as we heard there, in short, sharp bursts. But what happens, I think, as well, within that compression of time is the voice begins to blur. The vowels and the consonants are forced into a shorter temporal space. And as a result, start to change. I think this happened in punk rock as well. Punk music became more insular in the early 1980s. It began to exist in a much more underground space outside of the dominant social culture around it. And as a result, I think its approach to the music became more hardcore as well. There were stylistic shifts in composition as a result, one of which was the development of a more angry and aggressive vocal approach in some musicians. At the time in the early 80s, I was involved in what has been retrospectively called the cassette culture underground. which was very much a do-it-yourself approach to music, where people would share and trade music on cassette tapes through the postal service around the world, often for no cost, and often designing the visual components, the artwork themselves. As a result of that, I was exposed, luckily, to sound from across the globe. You know, I had many Dutch groups, rehearsal tapes and concerts and things like that. And there were a small number of these hardcore punk groups who were using a particularly rough and abrasive vocal style, which I was very much drawn to. It pulled out a lot of things for me, both in terms of its formal qualities and in terms of what it was conveying in terms of content. I'm thinking of a range of rather obscure groups from around the world. These particular ones using a more aggressive voice. United Mutation from America. Finnish groups like Ratus and the charmingly named Shitlickers. And particularly groups from Japan. And the Guy, Kuro, Confused, Jism, which I'll come to in a moment, and certain heavy metal bands such as Possessed and Hellhammer. And in all of these approaches to this aggressive voice, the voice is mutated, not only by the approach, but an effect for me is that my sad lack of knowledge of other people's languages meant that these singers were often singing in their native languages, and it created a strange disjunct for me because its meaning was unintelligible. When I was working on that voice as a purely formal element, I couldn't understand the meaning, you know, not speaking the language. I'll play some short excerpts of some of those hardcore bands just to give a sense of how they were working with the voice. They're very short excerpts, and then I'm going to play the United Mutation song in its entirety, which is only about 1 minute, 10 seconds, because it's got a really beautiful use of the voice. So yes, some examples there. All these things interrelate for me, and like any other piece of art, I suppose, that different influences begin to have an effect and start to shape the way that you think about it. I think we're running over quite a bit, so I'm going to wrap up pretty much. I'm pretty much near the end of... I was going to talk about, as I mentioned at the beginning, what I feel is the influence of the tail end of 20th century modernism. I'm thinking of the sound poets and approach to the word by certain poets like Mallarmé and Cummings. But I think there's more than enough theory in the world, so I think we can probably move along. I think the key thing that I was going to put it in a political context as well, talk about the limits of language and how that makes impositions on a voice and how the voice can be used to try and work through that, but maybe another time. So I think, because of the time thing, I'll wrap up. I'll play another short example of Napalm Death just to return to the beginning and put it in context. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Nick. And my bad, I went on too long. And actually, you were one of you.